जननी
परमेश्वरी जगत जननी
परमेश्वरी जगत जननी
परमेश्वरी जगत जननी
जय 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 हे साई 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 जननी
परमेश्वरी जगत जननी
परमेश्वरी जगत जननी
वेद कलामयी देवी भवानी
वेद कलामयी देवी भवानी
वेद कलामयी देवी भवानी
वेद कलामयी देवी भवानी
नाद विद्यामयी नारायणी
नाद विद्यामयी नारायणी
नाद विद्यामयी नारायणी
नाद विद्यामयी नारायणी
करुणा सदनी करुणामयी मां
करुणा सदनी करुणामयी मां
करुणा सदनी करुणामयी मां
करुणा सदनी करुणामयी मां
शरणं शरणं साई मां
शरणं शरणं साई मां
शरणं शरणं साई मां
शरणं शरणं साई मां
जय 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 हे साई जननी
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 परमेश्वरी जगत जननी
परमेश्वरी जगत जननी
जय 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 हे साई जननी
जय 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 हे साई जननी
परमेश्वरी जगत जननी
परमेश्वरी जगत जननी
वेद कलामयी देवी भवानी
कलामयी देवी भवानी
नाद विद्यामयी नारायणी
नाद विद्यामयी नारायणी
करुणा सदनी करुणामयी मां
करुणा सदनी करुणामयी मां
शरणं शरणं साई मां
शरणं शरणं साई मां
जय 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 हे साई जननी
जय जय हे साई जननी
जय 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 हे साई जननी
जय 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 हे साई जननी
परमेश्वरी जगत जननी
मधुसूदना साई देवा जनार्दन
श्री साई देवा
श्री साई देवा जनार्दन
श्री साई देवा
हर केशवा नारायण
हरि केशवा नारायण
हर केशवा नारायण
हरि केशवा नारायण
श्री हरि गोविंद मनमोहन
श्री हरि गोविंद मनमोहन
श्री हरि गोविंद मनमोहन
श्री हरि गोविंद मनमोहन
जनार्दना जगत्पालना
जनार्दना जगत्पालना
जनार्दना जगत्पालना
जनार्दना जगत्पालना
दीनावना दुख भंजना
दीनावना दुख भंजना
दीनावना दुख भंजना
दीनावना दुख भंजना
अरविंद लोचन आनंदना
अरविंद लोचन आनंदना
अरविंद लोचन आनंदना
अरविंद लोचन आनंदना
श्री वासुदेवा जनार्दना
श्री वासुदेवा
श्री वासुदेवा जनार्दना श्री साई देवा जनार्दना
श्री साई देवा
श्री साई देवा जनार्दना
श्री साई देवा
मधुसूदना हरे माधवा
मधुसूदना हरे माधवा
श्री वासुदेवा जनार्दना
श्री वासुदेवा दयामया
श्री साई देवा जनार्दना
श्री साई देवा
हर केशवा नारायण
हरि केशवा नारायण
श्री हरि गोविंद मनमोहन
श्री हरि गोविंद मनमोहन
जनार्दना जगत्पालना
जनार्दना जगत्पालना
दीनावना दुख भंजना
दीनावना दुख भंजना
अरविंद लोचन आनंदना
अरविंद लोचन आनंदना
श्री वासुदेवा जनार्दना मधुसूदना हरे माधवा
आनंदमया भगवान हे प्रेममया भगवान
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 ओ भगवान साई भगवान
भगवान साई भगवान
ओ भगवान साई भगवान
भगवान साई भगवान
आनंदमया भगवान हे प्रेममया भगवान
आनंदमया भगवान हे प्रेममया भगवान
हे करुणानिधे प्रभु साई राम
करुणानिधे प्रभु साई राम
हे करुणानिधे प्रभु साई राम
करुणानिधे प्रभु साई राम
कृपानिधे दिलों के प्राण
कृपानिधे दिलों के प्राण
कृपानिधे दिलों के प्राण
कृपानिधे दिलों के प्राण
ले लो प्रभु मुझे शरण लगा लो
प्रभु मुझे शरण लगा
ले लो प्रभु मुझे शरण लगा लो
प्रभु मुझे शरण लगा लो
दया करो भगवान
दया करो भगवान
कृपा करो भगवान
कृपा करो भगवान
आनंदमय भगवान हे प्रेममय भगवान
आनंदमया भगवान हे प्रेममया भगवान
ओ Bhagawan.
जय साईशा, 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 राधा माधव जगपतीशा, राधा माधव जगपतीशा, राधा माधव जगपतीशा, राधा माधव जगपतीशा, जय साईशा, जय साईशा, जय साईशा, जय साईशा, हृदय सारथी साई कन्हैया, हृदय सारथी साई कन्हैया, हृदय सारथी साई कन्हैया, हृदय सारथी साई कन्हैया, राधे गोविंदा प्रशांति निलया, राधे गोविंदा प्रशांति निलया, राधे गोविंदा प्रशांति निलया, राधे गोविंदा प्रशांति निलया, जय साईशा, जय साईशा, जय साईशा, जय साईशा, राधा माधव जयपतीशा, राधा माधव जयपतीशा, जय साईशा, जय साईशा, जय साईशा, जय साईशा, हृदय सारथी साई कन्हैया, हृदय सारथी साई कन्हैया, राधे गोविंदा प्रशांति निलया, राधे गोविंदा प्रशांति निलया, राधे गोविंदा प्रशांति निलया, राधे गोविंदा प्रशांति निलया, जय साईशा, जय साईशा।
रामचंद्र प्रभु रघुवंश रामा,
रामचंद्र प्रभु रघुवंश रामा,
रामचंद्र प्रभु रघुवंश रामा,
रामचंद्र प्रभु रघुवंश रामा,
सीतापते जय जानकी रामा,
सीतापते जय जानकी रामा,
सीतापते जय जानकी रामा, अगल्योदारक सुगुणाभिरामा, अगल्योदारक सुगुणाभिरामा,
अगल्योदारक सुगुणाभिरामा,
रावण संहार कोदंड रामा,
रावण संहार कोदंड रामा,
रावण संहार कोदंड रामा
रावण संहार कोदंड रामा
अयोध्य रामा पट्टाभिरामा
अयोध्य रामा पट्टाभिरामा
अयोध्य रामा पट्टाभिरामा
अयोध्य रामा पट्टाभिरामा
नव कोमल श्री साई रामा
नव नव कोमल श्री साई रामा
नव कोमल श्री साई रामा
नव नव कोमल श्री साई रामा
सीतापते जय जानकी रामा
सीतापते जय जानकी रामा
सीतापते जय जानकी रामा
सीतापते जय जानकी रामा
रामचंद्र प्रभु रघुवंश रामा
रामचंद्र प्रभु रघुवंश रामा
सीतापते जय जानकी रामा
सीतापते जय जानकी रामा
अवल्योद्धारक सुगुणा विरामा
अवयोधारक सुगुणा विरामा
रावण संहार कोदंड रामा
रावण संहार कोदंड रामा
अयोध्य रामा पट्टाभिरामा
अयोध्य रामा पट्टाभिरामा
नव कोमल श्री साई रामा
नव नव कोमल श्री साई रामा
सीतापते जय जानकी रामा
सीतापते जय जानकी रामा
सीतापते जय जानकी रामा
सीतापते जय जानकी रामा
रामचंद्र प्रभु रघुवंश रामा
गणपते परिपूर्ण वाळरुळवाय प्रभु गणपते परिपूर्ण वाळरुळवाय प्रभु गणपते परिपूर्ण वाळरुळवाय प्रभु गणपते परिपूर्ण वाळरुळवाय प्रभु गणपते 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 आदिमूल ಗಣನಾಥ ಗಜಾನನ ಅರ್ಬುದ ಧವಳ ಸ್ವರೂಪ ಮೂಲ ಗಣನಾಥ ಗಜಾನನ ಅರ್ಬುದ ಧವಳ ಸ್ವರೂಪ ದೇವ ದೇವ ಜಯ ವಿಜಯ ವಿನಾಯಕ ಚಿನ್ಮಯ ಪರ ಶಿವ ದೀಪ ದೇವ ದೇವ ಜಯ ವಿಜಯ ವಿನಾಯಕ ಚಿನ್ಮಯ ಪರ ಶಿವ ದೀಪ ಪ್ರಭೋ ಗಣಪತಿ ಪರಿಪೂರ್ಣವಾಳರುಳ್ವಾಯೇ ಪ್ರಭೋ ಗಣಪತಿ 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 वैराग्य विचार सार स्वर राग लय नटन पादा ज्ञान वैराग विचार सार स्वर राग लय नटन पादा नाम भजन गुण कीर्तन नवनीत नायक जय जगन्नाथ नाम भजन गुण नायक जय जगन्नाथ प्रभो गणपति परिपूर्ण वाणरुಳ್ವಾಯೇ प्रभो गणपति 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 ಕಿವಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಕೀರುತಿ ತುಂಬಿ ಕಿವಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಕೀರುತಿ ತುಂಬಿ ಮನದಲ್ಲಿ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಪ್ರಣವೋ ತುಂಬಿ ಮನದಲ್ಲಿ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಪ್ರಣವೋ ತುಂಬಿ ಕೂಡಲ ಸಂಗಮ ದೇವಾ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಕೂಡಲ ಸಂಗಮ ದೇವಾ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಕೂಡಲ ಸಂಗಮ ದೇವಾ ಕೂಡಲ ಸಂಗಮ देवा ಕೂಡಲ ಸಂಗಮ ದೇವಾ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಕೂಡಲ ಸಂಗಮ ದೇವಾ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಚರಣ ಕಮಲದೊಳಗಾನು ತುಂಬಿ ಚರಣ ಕಮಲದೊಳಗಾನು ತುಂಬಿ ವಚನದಲ್ಲಿ ನಾಮಾಮೃತ ತುಂಬಿ ವಚನದಲ್ಲಿ ನಾಮಾಮೃತ ತುಂಬಿ ನಯನದಲ್ಲಿ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಮೂರ್ತಿ ತುಂಬಿ ನಯನದಲ್ಲಿ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಮೂರ್ತಿ ತುಂಬಿ ವಚನದಲ್ಲಿ ನಾಮಾಮೃತ ತುಂಬಿ ವಚನದಲ್ಲಿ ನಾಮಾಮೃತ ತುಂಬಿ ವಚನದಲ್ಲಿ 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 ನಾಮಾಮೃತ ತುಂಬಿ. तोलीनो गोविंद मोले माहिर में तो लीनो गोविंद गोविंद मो मैं तो लीनो गोविंद मोले मायरे मैं तो लीनो गोविंद मो मैं तो लीनो गोविंद मोले मायरे मैं तो लीनो गोविंद मो मैं तो लीनो गोविंद लीनो गोविंद लीनो लीनो गोविंद मोले मायरे मैं तो लीनो गोविंद मो कोई कहे सस्ता कोई कहे महंगा 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 मैं लीनो तराजू तोले मायरे मैं तो लीनो तराजू तो मैं तो लीनो गोविंद मोले मायरे मैं तो लीनो गोविंद मो कोई कहे कालो कोई कहे गोरो 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 मैं लीनो मोलक मोले मायरे मैं तो लीनो गोविंद मो मैं तो लीनो गोविंद मोले मायरे मैं तो लीनो गोविंद मो मीरा के प्रभु नागर गिरिधर नागर गिरिधर नागर गिरिधर नागर गिरिधर नागर मीरा के प्रभु गिरिधर नागर आवत प्रेम की डोले मायरे में तो लीनो गोविंद मोह प्रभु आवत प्रेम की डोले मायरे में तो लीनो गोविंद मोह मैं तो लीनो गोविंद मोले मायरे में तो लीनो गोविंद मोह मैं तो लीनो गोविंद लीनो गोविंद लीनो गोविंद मोले मायरे में तो लीनो गोविंद मोह लीनो गोविंद मोह लीनो गोविंद मोह
Om Shri Sai Ram. Offering our most humble and grateful pranams at the lotus feet of the light of all our lives, our dearest Swami. Respected elders, brothers and sisters, Sai Ram to one and all. We also take this opportunity to wish all of you a very happy, joyful and blissful Deepavali. The Festival of Lights holds great significance in the history of Indian culture and spirituality. During the churning of the ocean between the Devas and Asuras, Goddess Lakshmi and Lord Dhanvantri, the god of health, are believed to have emerged from the ocean on this day. It marks the day when Ayodhya celebrated the coronation of Lord Rama and Mother Sita after vanquishing Ravana. In the Dwapar Yuga too, it was the day when Lord Krishna, along with Devi Satyabhama, destroyed the tyrant king Narakasura, thereby liberating all his captives. Thus, Deepavali has always signified the victory of good over evil, right over wrong, light over darkness, wisdom over ignorance, and hope over despair. And on this day, Swami, we pray to Thee to light the lamp of selfless love in all our hearts, thereby dispelling the darkness of ego and attachments. We begin this evening's proceedings with Vedic invocation by students of the Sri Sathya Sai Center for Human Excellence, and they will chant the Narayana Upanishad. Sai Ram.
नमः सरस्वत्यै नमः श्री गुरुभ्यो नमः हरिः ओम सहना भवतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै ओम शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः अथ पुरुषो ह वै नारायणो कामयतः प्रजासृजेति नारायणात् प्राणो जायते मनः सर्वेन्द्रियाणि च कं वायुर्ज्योतिरापः पृथिवी विश्वस्य धारिणी नारायणात् ब्रह्मा जायते नारायणाद् रुद्रो जायते नारायणादिन्द्रो जायते नारायणात् प्रजापतयः प्रजायन्ते नारायणात् द्वादशादित्या रुद्रावसवः सर्वाणि च छन्दागुंसि नारायणात् देव समुत्पद्यन्ते नारायणे प्रवर्तन्ते नारायणे प्रलीयन्ते ॐ अथ नित्यो नारायणः ब्रह्मा नारायणः शिवश्च नारायणः शक्रश्च नारायणः द्यावा पृथिव्यौ च नारायणः कालश्च नारायणः दिशश्च नारायणः ऊर्ध्वश्च नारायणः अधश्च नारायणः अन्तर्बहिश्च नारायणः नारायण एवेदगुं सर्वं यद्भूतं यच्च भव्यम् निष्कलो निरञ्जनो निर्विकल्पो निराख्यातः शुद्धो देव एको नारायणः न द्वितीयोऽस्ति कश्चित् य एवं वेद स विष्णुरेव भवति स विष्णुरेव भवति ओमित्यग्रे व्याहरेत् नम इति पश्चात् नारायणायेत्युपरिष्टात् ओमित्येकाक्षरम् नम इति द्वे अक्षरे नारायणायेति पञ्चाक्षराणि एतद्वै नारायणस्याष्टाक्षरं पदम् यो ह वै नारायणस्याष्टाक्षरं पदमध्येति अनबभ्रुवः सर्वमायुरेति विन्दते प्राजापत्यगुं रायस्पौषं गौपत्यम् ततो मृतत्वमश्नुते ततो मृतत्वमश्नुत इति य एवं वेद ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः शुभं करोति कल्याणम् आरोग्यधनसम्पदम् शत्रुबुद्धिविनाशाय दीपज्योतिर्नमोऽस्तु ते ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः हरि ओम तत्सत् श्री साईश्वरार्पणमस्तु।
May we now invite Sister Bhuvana Santanam to give us a brief account of the recently concluded divine visit to Argentina, Colombia and Mexico. Saira.
Om Shri Sai Ram. Offering our collective prayers. We've just returned this morning after a wonderful trip to Latin America. And like Swami says that in this ongoing mission of his, it is only about work, work and work. So there was one Bhumi Puja, and then Swami announced a new ashram in Mexico, and he also visited the upcoming ashram in Argentina. So it was a wonderful trip, and I'd like to recap from the moment we left here on the 5th, and it was a very, very long flight. We were almost in the aircraft for over 23 hours, and we reached Buenos Aires in Argentina. And of course, since we arrived very late at night, the next morning was rest. It was jet lag. It was the other side of the globe we had traveled, and so that morning was rest. And the next morning, which was the 7th, when everybody reached Dr. Jorge Berra and Mrs. Rosana's residence, Swami manifested at their house. And it was a very impromptu satsang. Swami blessed everybody. In fact, Dr. Berra and his family, they have been devotees for over 30 years. And Swami revealed some very intimate moments from their very first visit, when their daughter today, who has a little baby, was suffering from a stomach problem, and how Swami had created Vibhuti 30 years ago. And it was indeed a very beautiful moment for the family when Swami revealed these very, very intimate moments with them when they arrived for the very first time in Prashanti. And thereafter lunch was served, and in the evening there was a satsang of about 60 to 70 people at the residence of Dr. Berra. Brothers and sisters, this was a very powerful discourse we had heard of Swami. Swami spoke about Premasai, that in the year 2026 is when the message of the new master will be unveiled, and he will start traveling the world around, and people will know of the master. Swami went on to say that there will never be such a master who will come, whose language is silence. So he said, unless we all calm our minds, we will never be able to communicate to that level of spirituality and higher consciousness. Swami said, within the next 10 years, there's so much of change which is going to happen. He said, the change must happen. He said, Shrishti, Sthiti, Laya is all part of God's work. So as part of this change, great amount of annihilation with great magnitude will happen. And he said that you should be happy that after the penance of many, many births, you are witnessing an era which does not come very often. And Swami went on to say, if you resist, you will be sorrowful. If you want to be part of this plan, you need to accept the change. Then Swami went on to talk more about this aspect. And he said, every time an avatar has come, very few people around him have worked for the avatar. There have been more people who have opposed the avatar. And similarly, this is what is happening. So we all have to be very fortunate, he said, that a handful of people are doing God's work. And it is out of great, great fortune, Swami said. It is out of great penance after many, many births. So brothers and sisters, this is something we all have to really keep in mind. Swami himself said that how fortunate are we to be part of his mission, to be doing what he's given us, to be witnessing this era which otherwise will not happen far too often. And this was on the 7th evening, Mangalarti was given, everybody was served dinner. On the 8th morning, it was a day to be etched in the history of Argentina, as Swami was going to visit the ashram. It is a 10 minutes drive from Dr. Berra's residence. In fact, last year, when we were in Argentina and when we were returning from a devotee's house, and Swami was passing this huge 10,000 square feet property, and there was this huge house, and he looked at Dr. Berra, who was driving him, and said, and there was a huge for sale board outside this house, and Swami said, this is a 10,000 square feet property. It has square meters property, and this has 6 bedrooms. And this will be the ashram for Argentinas. And Dr. Berra was taken aback because he lives very close by. And Swami, when Dr. Berra and his family had come here during Shivratri, he had told them, you have to institute the Sai Prema Foundation in Argentina and ensure it is done before I arrive in October. And Dr. Berra was very skeptical. He said, Swami, but in Argentina, it doesn't happen so often. It doesn't happen so quickly. So it will take some time. Swami said, it will happen before I arrive in Argentina. In fact, the day when we were leaving on 5th of October from the Bangalore airport, Dr. Berra had called the offices of the government to check if the papers have been signed, and he was told, no, the papers are still pending. And he prayed to Swami and he said, okay, Swami, whatever is your will. The next morning, when he called, miraculously the papers were signed and Sai Prema Foundation was instituted and established. And brothers and sisters, as Swami had said, we were all flying somewhere mid-air between Doha and Sao Paulo when the papers were all signed. And as Swami had said, by the time he set foot in Argentina, the Sai Prema Foundation was formed. And this is the beautiful, very, very, very beautiful ashram. And when we entered, it was so wonderful. This is on the first floor. It is like a meditation hall. And Swami spoke to everybody. This house, brothers and sisters, was actually built 6 years ago. And the owner, he's an old man, but he couldn't come. He wanted to sell this house for the last 6 years, but never found an owner. And Swami said, because this house was built for a purpose and will never find any other buyer. It is for a divine purpose, because this ashram will give succor and light to many, many people who will come here. And Swami said Sai Prema Foundation stood for SAI, which is Service, Adoration and Illumination. And he went on to give a lot of guidance about how to fight hunger in Argentina. And he said that this ashram will also serve for a lot of teachers, and he gave very valuable advice. Now the owner who had built this house, his son and niece were there. They don't know Sai Baba, they don't know Sai Baba's work. But alas, they are devotees of God. They were all very spiritually connected. And it was so overwhelming to see them cry in the presence of Swami. And they submitted themselves to Swami and said, we want to be part of this noble work, they said. And it was so wonderful that Divine Connect was indeed very beautiful. And Swami gave a lot of instructions about what needs to be built, what needs to be where. And he told them that next year when he comes, various aspects should be ready and he will stay in the ashram when he comes the next time. And thereafter Swami returned to the Berra residence for lunch, and in the evening we all went for the public satsang. Swami first met the ambassador to Argentina, Shri Sanjiv Ranjan, and along with him he came to the venue of the public satsang. And it was again a very beautiful evening. There was a musical presentation by Brother Charlie and his wife, Mrs Alison, whom we've all heard many times during the Christmas and the Guru Purnima celebrations here. And thereafter we had the speeches of the three distinguished speakers, Mr. Isaac Tigridge, Sri C. Srinivas and Sri B. Narsamurti. And Swami gave his divine discourse and spoke about love, spoke about values, and said that today, if the world is undergoing so much of problems, it is because there are no human values. And he said, what is human value? What is the value which gives value to human value? He said it is love. So the basis of everything, he said, is love. And after the public satsang, we all returned to Dr. Berra's residence. The next morning, soon after breakfast, we flew from Buenos Aires to Salta, which is in the northwest of Argentina, very close to the Peru border. And it was a 1-hour flight, and we reached the residence of Dr. Pablo and Mrs Liliana. And yet again a story where they've been devotees for over 2 decades. Never visited Prashanti Nilayam because they didn't afford, they could never collect the money to buy a ticket to come to Prashanti, but had always prayed to Swami that, Swami, we need to experience your presence. Swami had visited the lady in her dreams many times and said, I will come to your house. And there Swami was at their residence. And the next morning, Swami visited the residence of yet another lady, Mrs Liliana. In fact, it was Mrs Liliana who had invited Swami to Salta. And Swami revealed over there that very recently Mrs Liliana was sick. She was unwell with very high fever, and she kept continuously praying to Swami. She lives alone in the house. She was praying to Swami, and she had a dream where Swami came, stood by her side, and blessed her. The next morning when she woke up, she was perfectly fine. And when Swami reached her house, he said, "That was not a dream. I was there physically, standing by your side all night to ensure you were well by the next morning." And she was completely overwhelmed by this revelation of Swami. And then Swami in his discourse said that he came to Salta because of one invitation, but at the end of the day, he wanted to bless two of his wonderful devotees. And in that moment, Mrs. Liliana offered her house to Swami at his lotus feet and said, "Swami, I want to offer this to you so that this house can be used in whatever way possible for the upcoming ashram." It was all so wonderful, so beautiful. We were all blessed to even witness this divine love between Bhagawan and his devotee. And thereafter Swami returned in the afternoon to Dr. Pablo's house for lunch, and in the evening we all proceeded for the public satsang, which was organized at a venue, and over 300, for a place like Salta, 300 devotees gathering for a satsang is unheard of. Of course, when the divine pulls you, when the divine wants you, you have to be there. It was a glorious satsang in the evening, and thereafter Swami, after the satsang, he returned to Dr. Pablo's residence. The next morning, we left. It was a whole day of travel for us because we went from Salta to Buenos Aires. From Buenos Aires, we caught a flight to Colombia, to Bogota. It was the first time Swami was visiting Colombia. And we reached late in the wee hours of the morning, so the next morning was again rest. Lunch was served to Swami, and in the evening there was a little satsang at the residence of the host, Dr. Richard Deeb, his wife Mrs. Norma, their daughter Miss Catalina. And yet again, this is a story of a family who've been devoted to Swami for over 30, 40 years. And they would visit Prashanti very often, and they had invited Swami, and Swami had said, "Wait, wait, wait." And this is again an outpour of love where Swami said that he would stay at Dr. Richard's house. And in the evening during the satsang, Swami beckoned Dr. Richard and asked him to speak about his experiences. And he spoke about his experiences with Swami when he had gone to Prashanti and how he was unwell, and Swami came in a dream and hugged him, and the next morning he was fine. And it was so beautiful because as he was speaking, Swami kept interjecting in between, making more revelations to the surprise of Mr. Richard. And in fact, Swami was enhancing his entire talk with various aspects of the intimate moments between him and the Lord. It was really wonderful to hear. And the Deeb family, and along with the daughter, Miss Catalina, her husband, have all been founding members of the Sathya school in Argentina. And they've, in Colombia. And they've been working with all these little children for many, many years. And they've also been working with children in a home in a city called Medellin, which is about 2 hours away from Salta. And 6 children had come to the satsang that evening. And one of the child, Swami beckoned one of the child and he asked him to speak. And it was so wonderful that this little boy, who must have been about 10, 11 years, expressed his gratitude to Swami for giving them a home, for giving them a caretaker whom they call mother, and for giving them food. And later when we spoke to the caretaker of this home, she said, "Swami manifests in this home regularly. The children are able to see Swami." And even just 3 days ago when they were at a bhajan, they saw Swami in the chair. And this is how the bond between these kids and Swami have developed so much that when during the evening satsang, when Swami kept asking them questions, what do you want? They kept saying, yes, Swami, yes. It was so beautiful. And we were all so overwhelmed. There was not a dry eye in the room. It's so lovely to see these children interact with Swami. And thereafter, dinner was served to everybody. And then the next morning, Swami called a group, the core group of the Colombian team. He spoke to them, gave them very precious advice of what needs to be done in Bogota and in Colombia about human values, largely about human values, about education, how more children can be educated. And in the evening, we all proceeded for the public satsang. And the public satsang was held in an auditorium called the Conrad Lawrence Auditorium, which was about a 30-minute drive from the residence of Mr. Richard Deeb. And yet again over here, during Swami's discourse, he called this child back on stage and asked him to speak. And it was really beautiful. There were about 250 people who had gathered here in Bogota. And during the question and answer session, there was a group who had come from Venezuela. And they prayed to Swami saying that there's so much of problem which is happening in Venezuela. And Swami assured them, blessed them and said, I am coming soon to your country also, and showered them with all his love and called them the next day to speak to them. And after the satsang got over, we all returned to the residence of Mr. Richard and Mrs. Norma. The next morning was a little bit of a rest. Swami had a lot of interviews. He spoke to a lot of people. He called the family of Mr. Richard, and thereafter lunch was served. And in the evening, before we flew from Bogota to Mexico, our next destination, Swami called the group of the Venezuela devotees and blessed them and spoke to them and assured them that he would come next year to both Colombia and to Venezuela. And we took our flight and reached Mexico City. And Mexico City, we thought after the earthquake would be in rubbles, but of course the area which was affected was in the center of Mexico City, and we went to the south of Mexico City to the residence of Mr. Hector and Miss Cynthia Avalos. And yet again, they've been ardent devotees of Swami for many, many years. And last year, through a friend, they came to know about Swami in his continuing mission. And we landed, and by the time we reached the house of Mr. Hector and Miss Cynthia, it was almost 4 a.m. in the morning. Swami manifested at 4 a.m. And it was a new house, and Swami knew his way exactly how to and where to go to his room. He went to his room, told everybody, go and rest. It's early in the morning. I will see you all the next day. The next morning, because it was very early in the morning, it was rest. Lunch was served to Swami in the afternoon. And in the evening, we all proceeded to the venue of the public satsang, which was the Institute of Civil Engineers in Mexico City. And over 400 people had gathered there to bask in Swami's love. This was the first time Swami was visiting Mexico City. Last year, Swami had visited Chihuahua. And the first thing, as part of the welcome ceremony, there were 4 Native Americans who, in their language called the Nautal language, which is older than the Mayans and the Aztecs, it was an invocation ceremony of the gods. It was a 15-minute ritual where they invoked the 4 directions, the sky, the earth, the elements. And as they kept invoking God, they prayed to say that, thank you, Mother Earth, for allowing our feet to touch you. It is indeed a great blessing. And later, we learned that this is a ritual where all the gods are invoked and all the gods appear. And later, Brother Madhusudan told us that when this ritual was going on, he saw the Mayan gods, he saw the gods of the Aztec appear right there at the venue. And the Mayans, it is said, just to give a little background to our students, the The Mayans and the Aztecs are one of the oldest civilizations known to man, and these civilizations have always intrigued man. But the Mayans believed that the cyclic nature of birth and death is continuous, and there is no end and there is no beginning, and therefore with the gods and all spiritual beings there is no death and there is no birth. And it was indeed wonderful. And thereafter all the distinguished members of the entourage spoke during the satsang, and Swami delivered his divine discourse where he spoke of love. And one thing which I recall, which Sri C. Srinivas spoke, was about the Center for Human Development, because the next morning we were leaving Mexico City to go to Chihuahua for the Bhumi Puja of the Center for Human Development. He recalled 40 years ago when Swami had taken him to the inauguration of an institute which was built in the memory of a great minister at that point in time, Mr. T.A. Pai. And at that time, for the very first time, Swami had mentioned the words Center for Human Development. And he said, Center for Human Development, what is it? He said, human development is at the heart of every being. And what is it? It is perfection, Swami had said. And he went on to say, Swami went on to say at that time during his discourse, what is perfection? Perfection is nothing but total dependence in God. Swami had so beautifully defined perfection and Center for Human Development. And thereafter the satsang concluded and we returned that night. The next morning, after breakfast, we all took a flight from Mexico City to Chihuahua, which is about 2.5 hours, and we reached Chihuahua in the afternoon around 3 p.m. We drove straight to the residence of Mrs. Irma, who had hosted Swami last year as well. And we quickly refreshed and we drove to the site of the Center for Human Development, which was about 20 minutes drive from the residence of Mrs. Irma. Set in yet again a very, very, very beautiful surrounding with mountains all around. And in fact, the story goes here as well, that 20 years ago, this land was offered. And at that point in time, this devotee, Mr. Raphael, who had come to Prashanti and told Swami, prayed to Swami, that Swami, a center must be built in Chihuahua. Swami said, no, this is not the time. A time will come. I will tell you. And brothers and sisters, it is the same land today that this Center for Human Development is going to be built. And Swami himself performed the Bhumi Puja through Brother Madhusudan. And he asked all of us to chant the Sai Gayatri. And thereafter, he beckoned Mr. Raphael to speak and to tell everybody the story what happened 20 years ago. And thereafter, he called Srinivas to speak as well, who will be helping the devotees with the plan of the Center for Human Development. And thereafter Swami, in his divine discourse, spoke about this place. He said, see, I could have chosen any place in Mexico. Why this particular place? And then Swami said, for everything there is a reason, and for everything there is a season. I know what I am doing. This place I chose is simply because all these devotees are very selfless, and in their heart of hearts they want to do something selfless for other human beings. This is the reason I chose this place for the Center for Human Development, where many, many, many people are going to come here. It was beautiful that evening yet again. We returned to the residence of Mrs. Irma at around 6:30 p.m. Then after that, Swami blessed a few people with interviews, and dinner was served to Swami. And about 8:30 p.m., we went back to the airport of Chihuahua to take our flight back to Mexico City. We landed early in the morning. The next morning, breakfast was served to Swami, and there was a few devotees who had gathered for the final Mangala Arati before we all departed back to India. And Swami made a revelation during the Mangala Arati. He said, an hour from here, go search for a land. The ashram will come up in Mexico City. What we saw yesterday is a center for human development, and now an ashram will come. Next year when I come, I will inaugurate the Center for Human Development, and the Bhumi Puja for the ashram will be performed. And that was so lovely. All the devotees were so jubilant. And thus came to an end 2 wonderful weeks with the Lord of the Universe in Latin America. Wonderful to see the love between him and his devotees. And we returned this morning on this auspicious Diwali day back in Muddenahalli. Sai Ram.
Swami has commanded that the bursting of the crackers will take place in the Hrudaya Mandiram grounds, and all should be assembled there in few minutes. Swami will also come there shortly.